Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today we are going to be finishing up our two-part series on the many different paranormal manifestations of man's best friend, with some theoretical talk. So strap on your tinfoil hats because this is going to get even weirder than usual. Now, of course, in my previous episode, we covered many of the different manifestations of this phenomenon, which of course is believed to be associated with as varied things as demons, fairies, ghosts, omens, guardians, even showing up in conjunction with UFOs. However, as with much of the paranormal, I believe that the similarities across these different traditions only serves to show that the phenomenon itself can't be so categorized by the belief systems through which it's framed. One of the most interesting juxtapositions in the phenomenon of spectral hounds has got to be their believed connection to hell, hence the name hellhound, and their proximity to holy places, whether churches or cemeteries. They often show up on or near hallowed ground. This is really clearly observed in the phenomenon of the church grim, which often involves the grisly practice of foundation sacrifice, in which animals and sometimes people would be buried alive in the foundation of a church or other establishment, which they thought would, one, strengthen the foundation, and two, have the soul of that entity return as some sort of guardian of the establishment. Dogs were a commonly utilized animal for this sacrifice because of their symbolic ties to loyalty and fidelity, though they were exclusively used for another practice, that of preventing any human soul from becoming a church walker. It was a strongly held belief that the first body buried in a new cemetery would have its soul doomed to guard that cemetery for all eternity. So very often, dogs would be buried first. They would actually be sacrificed and buried before any other human burials, so that then the dog's soul would return as the church grim and prevent any human soul from becoming a church walker. Likewise, if there's a connection between spectral dogs and sacred ground, there's also a connection between spectral dogs and profane ground. Gallows, jails, and places of execution are notoriously haunted by hellhounds. So, whether places of final repose or places of any last words, there is an undoubtable connection between the manifestations of these spectral hounds and the dead. That's something we'll get into a little bit more further on. However, churches and gallows, cemeteries and jails, places of death and the dead, these are not the only spots bedeviled by hellhounds. It seems that an exorbitant amount of sightings have to do with a particular stretch of road, a particular lane, a crossroads. And again, too, even further than that, the black dog of Hewish Barton was observed lying across the threshold like a barghest, a reference then that the barghest is associated with thresholds. It's also really interesting to note that these spectral beasts also accompany people as they travel on the road, and this can be either ominous or comforting. Moving on then, we also have the connection between black dogs and waterways, and of course this was observed by Ivan Bunn in his article, Black Dogs and Water, from Fortean times. And truthfully, a lot of paranormal entities are associated with water and waterways, whether it's ghosts, UFOs, sightings of the Virgin Mary, fairies. And the reasons behind this run the gamut from, in the case of UFOs, secret submerged underwater bases, to ghosts that somehow the water helps charge paranormal activity. But even in the stories mentioned last episode, we do see that a lot of these sightings of black dogs occur near water or waterways, or often storms will pop up in conjunction with them. And I think that this can mean a variety of things, but one of the things that really stands out to me has nothing at all to do with water's physical characteristics, but everything to do with its symbolism of the great submerged subconscious. And this is a very neat segue into my next topic, which is the mythic connection. The connection between the spectral dog phenomenon and classic mythology has been pointed out by many researchers, among which are Linda Godfrey, Patrick Harpur, and Steve Ward. And I think that there really are quite a few parallels between this paranormal lore and these ancient beliefs. The spectral dog phenomenon really seems to center in on themes related to thresholds, travel, waterways, guardianship, and the dead or the underworld. From that, one of the really clearest mythic connections would definitely be Cerberus, the massive three-headed canine guardian of the Greek underworld. Cerberus literally sat at the threshold between life and death, and in some stories was positioned at the mouth of the river Acheron. So again, we also have a connection to waterways. From Norse mythology, we have Fenrir, son of Loki, bound in a magic logic loop since the dawn of time. Fenrir's release will usher in the end of the world, swallowing Odin at Ragnarok. Now again, we have a mythological dog connected to death and destruction, this time the ending of this world, and water. Not only does Fenrir's name mean fen dweller, but in addition to being contained by the mythic chain Gleipnir, Fenrir also has a sword wedged in his mouth, keeping it open Looney Tunes style, from which flows the river Van. And then finally we have Anubis, of course depicted usually as a man with a jackal's head and sometimes as a jackal in totality, the ancient Egyptian god associated with death, mummification, tombs, cemeteries, and the underworld. Now, a quick note here too, considering the importance of the Nile to ancient Egyptian religion, though Anubis has no specific ties to water per se, every single deity is somehow intrinsically connected to the Nile, and Anubis is no exception. He's specifically symbolically tied to the silt of the Nile, which is representative of regeneration. Anubis was also considered a psychopomp, a deity which helped the dead across the threshold, and later on the Greeks would associate him with Hermes, who, among other things, was lord of the crossroads and travel. Now, it's also an interesting thing to note. It's likely that the jackal was chosen to represent Anubis because of a startling show of duality. Early on, jackals were taught to guard ancient Egyptian cemeteries from other jackals, who would go in and dig up the bodies to devour them. So it's this really startling edge of duality, which I find very intriguing as it pertains to the lore of spectral dogs. Now I want to be super clear. In discussing the mythological connections between dogs, water, and the dead or underworld, thresholds, and their dualistic nature, I'm by no means suggesting that these myths are the source of spectral canine lore. Rather, what I'm suggesting is that the same symbolism and archetype behind these myths is also responsible for the manifestations of these spectral hounds. The dog was the first domesticated animal, predating any other agricultural animals or anything like that. Currently, the debate is ongoing exactly where to put their domestication, but it's somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 years ago. And it's likely that this relationship kind of happened naturally. It was just a symbiotic relationship between man and the wolf, which grew over time into the bond that we currently have. And it's actually really neat, but there is a prevalence of dog burials in these ancient sites, which show that for a long time, they've been given kind of that respect and that degree of acceptance and personhood, much like they are today. However, as evidenced in many legends across the world, but notably the legend of Gelert, the dog as a symbol still kind of captures a balance somewhere between beast and man's best friend. Kind of like man's beast friend, something that's capable of either devotion or destruction. And it's this balance that can be really observed in how a black dog can be seen as a protector of the fearful or a portent of death. The hellhound haunts the churchyard, the black dog guards the traveler. So, as with so much of this stuff, what does it all mean? I mean, who knows what it really all means, but I think that very often, in dealing with the phenomenon of spectral dogs, we're dealing with exactly that duality. Something that can be both sacred and profane, a desecrator and protector, as the jackals are to the tomb. Literally our closest bond to the animal kingdom since time immemorial, I think it makes sense that one of our most loyal archetypes would end up being canine, showing up throughout all of these strange theaters throughout which play these bizarre encounters. The fact that they've even outsourced showing up in by now classic UFO encounters is further evidence of the fidelity of this archetype to the human experience. And on the flip side too, it also goes a long way to show that UFOs are no exception to the age-old rule of the paranormal, and are still really part of the so-called fairy glamour or demonic illusion of belief systems past. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the theories and patterns regarding the many paranormal manifestations of man's best friend, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may hold. Till then, you can check out my podcast on the Paranormal UK radio network, also called Just Another Tinfoil Hat. New episodes every other Monday, and all past episodes available for download on Podbean. And if you want to keep up with whatever else I might possibly have going on, please check out my website, which is also called, get ready for this, justanothertinfoilhat.com. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.